Hello and good day. Welcome to our video channel, God's Promises. And today's video will be a fast, concise overview, Book of Job, Chapter 8. Let's get started now. The Book of Job, found in the Old Testament, is a rich source of wisdom and guidance on how to live a life of faith and trust in God. In Chapter 8, one of Job's friends, Bildad the Shuhite, speaks to Job and offers his thoughts on why Job is suffering and what he needs to do to find relief. Bildad begins his speech by asking Job if his children sinned against God and were punished for it. He then suggests that if Job himself were pure and upright, God would not have allowed him to suffer. Bildad asserts that God is just and would never punish the innocent, and therefore Job must have done something wrong to bring this suffering upon himself. Bildad then goes on to describe how God blesses those who obey him and punishes those who turn away from him. He uses analogies of plants growing in the desert and houses built on the sand to illustrate his point that the wicked will ultimately be destroyed, while the righteous will prosper. While Bildad's words may seem harsh and judgmental, there are some important lessons we can learn from his speech. First, it is important to remember that God is just and that our actions have consequences. We cannot expect to live a life of sin and disobedience, and not face the consequences of our choices. Second, Bildad's analogies serve as a reminder that we must build our lives on a solid foundation. Just as a house built on sand will eventually crumble, a life built on worldly pursuits and selfish desires will ultimately lead to destruction. Instead, we must strive to build our lives on a foundation of faith and trust in God, which will sustain us even in the midst of difficult circumstances. Finally, we must remember that God's ways are not our ways, and that His plans for us are often beyond our understanding. While we may not always understand why we are facing certain trials and hardships, we can trust that God is working all things together for our good and for His glory. In terms of practical application, we can learn from Bildad's speech that it is important to examine our own lives and make sure we are living in accordance with God's will. We must strive to live a life of righteousness and obedience, and trust that God will reward our faithfulness. Furthermore, we must be intentional about building our lives on a solid foundation, which means prioritizing our relationship with God above all else. This involves spending time in prayer and Bible study, surrounding ourselves with other believers who can encourage and support us, and seeking to live a life of service and compassion towards others. In conclusion, while Bildad's speech in Chapter 8 of the Book of Job may come across as harsh and judgmental, there are important lessons we can learn from it. We must remember that God is just and that our actions have consequences, and we must strive to build our lives on a solid foundation of faith and trust in God. By doing so, we can live a life that is pleasing to Him and ultimately leads to true fulfillment and joy. Thank you for visiting us today. Please share with us your favorite Bible chapter below in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help our channel grow. Looking forward to see you back here for our next video. Always take good care.